Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. It is the show on the internet where me and John talk about pro wrestling and whether or not it makes sense. And wouldn't you know it, turns out professional wrestling doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you break it down. I don't know if you've noticed this.
I mean, yeah, it's been kind of the one thing I'd say I've picked up over watching wrestling for the last 30 odd years is there's not a whole lot of sense to it.
No, it doesn't make a lick of sense when you think about it. And we've thought about it way too much. And that's why we are here to tell you all about the nonsensical world of professional wrestling. So today we're going to talk about AEW because the last couple of shows have been pretty WWE centric, I think, or NXT or the draft and stuff like that. Let's talk about AEW for a little bit. I would just wonder, John, what's your favorite storyline that AEW has done all year? Now, let's just say for this year. We don't even have to start for their whole history, which is 2 years. Let's say just the calendar since January. What's been the best, the most electric storyline AEW's put on that's really grabbed you?
Well, you've kind of put me on the spot here because nothing is really popping into my head right now. Like, I know there's been a lot of big stories they've done, like the whole Jericho MJF feud and all that kind of jazz. And that didn't really grab me the way I think it was supposed to. I think that ended up going way too long and was kind of booked a bit ass backwards with the whole...
didn't make any sense.
Yeah, Jesus, yeah. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of great feuds in AEW this year, I'd say.
No, I've been thinking that too. That whenever you think of like really good feuds, like heated feuds and stuff, there hasn't really been a whole lot of that in AEW as a whole, in general. Like you mentioned the Jericho MJF feud, and that really does seem like the closest thing to a feud we've had in a long time. And I think part of that is because Chris Jericho spent the majority of his career in the WWE. A guy knows storylines. Doesn't excuse the fact that maybe that storyline didn't play out the way he might have wanted it to. It was a little bit overbooked and overblown and nonsensical, and it went on forever. But it was still more of a storyline than you were really seeing with the rest of the show,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of odd that like no storyline for Kenny Omega really came into my head because obviously he's been the world champion for a year now, pretty much. And as world champion, you'd think he should be the focus of the show and, the sort of main draw. But really, you think about it, Kenny Omega hasn't done a whole lot of like proper feuds this year. He kind of had that thing with Jon Moxley, which was just a sort of residual thing from winning the title that just, they didn't really know how to end it. And so it just kept getting dragged on.
Right. That went on forever as well.
And it had the disappointing exploding ring death match as well, which kind of took away any shine that the feud had and, kind of left a bit of a sour taste in people's mouths and stuff. But then after that feud finished, he didn't really do a whole lot. He kind of had that 1 month where he had a thrown together match against Orange Cassidy and someone else who I've completely forgotten. I think it was Pac.
I think it was Pac, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like it was a match booked like about 2 weeks before the actual pay-per-view that it was on. Then I guess the Christian feud, that kind of had some build to it because at least Christian took the Impact Wrestling title from Kenny Omega and kind of, that he proved that he could beat Kenny Omega, which was at least somewhat interesting, even though, there was no chance he was going to be the one who beat him for the AEW World title as well. But still, they had like some good matches and, did some good business. But yeah, I mean, it's just been a bit of a disappointing year from that point of view.
Right. The thing with Christian Cage was interesting, but it never really felt like an interesting feud. Yeah, there never seemed to be like anything that really kickstarted that and made people like, "Wow, you gotta see this," which is a shame because I think they probably could have told a really good story, but nobody knows what that story is. Like nobody knows what story they told, right? And with Moxley, right? When did Kenny Omega win the belt? Like, was it November or December or last year?
I think it was sort of, yeah, it was either November or December. It was quite
Yeah.
close to the end of the year.
Yeah, and Moxie and him were still feuding up February, March kind of time of this year. But like, what story were they telling other than like you said, Omega beat Moxley, and Moxley, gets his return title shot, which is one of the few times that that's ever happened in AEW. That never seems to happen. It's very strange. But like those two guys were fighting each other for a while, but you can say, I guess, that the feud there was over the belt. Moxley wanted his belt back, but now Moxley has completely moved on to other shit. Doesn't seem remotely concerned with getting his belt back. So that's part of the reason why that feud doesn't feel like a feud, because the thing they were feuding over hasn't materialized, hasn't gone anywhere. Moxley's moved on to other stuff. We both thought, or I certainly thought, the storyline we would have been talking about at this point in the year would have been the Impact AEW crossover thing, because that seemed like a really big fucking deal. And here we are, and nothing happened. Not a goddamn thing happened. That was so uninteresting.
Yeah, I guess it was just an excuse to get the Good Brothers on AEW with their buddies, but
just so strange. Kenny Omega won their belt, and then after months of nothing, Christian Cage, who also wasn't contracted to TNA, won the belt. Who is currently, as the time of recording, still their champion. And seems to be doing more work over in TNA or in Impact than he is over in AEW.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which is, which makes sense if you're the Impact champion, but doesn't make any sense if you're contracted to AEW. Very strange. I thought for sure that was going to be something really interesting. I thought that they keep talking about, the Forbidden Door being open or whatever. Well, what they just mean is like just random matches will happen.
Yeah.
They don't mean anything interesting is going to happen with those matches. It just means that a New Japan guy is going to fight an AEW guy once or twice, and that's it. And that's not interesting because like we said, there's no story there. But you could tell a story there. It's fucking right there. It's all right there. And they're like, no, don't worry about it. People are more entertained by the idea of these matchups than the build to the matchups.
Yeah, I mean, like that's pretty evident from this past week where, last week on Rampage, like just a couple of days before Rampage happened, they announced it's going to be Bryan Danielson versus Minoru Suzuki. And, it was a quality match. Like they beat the shit out of each other and it was fun to watch. But like they just threw it out there, no build, no kind of heat on Suzuki as well, because like he'd lost his previous two matches that he'd had in AEW. Like the whole thing was just poorly done just to try and pop the rating against SmackDown. But
which I don't think they did.
No, by all accounts they did not do that. But it's just a weird kind of like, I don't really understand what the goal is for stuff like that as well, because Tony Khan, if you listen to him talking about it in one of the very many interviews he does every week.
Every week.
Yeah, he was like, oh, this will bring in the big viewers and stuff, and we'll compete with SmackDown and beat them and blah, blah, blah. But like, will it though? Because he's just, aiming that match towards a very niche audience, like people who are familiar with New Japan and Suzuki and who will care that Bryan Danielson is, wrestling against this guy. Whereas me, I'm a guy who's watched wrestling for 30 years and I've had, barely any experience with Minoru Suzuki. I've never really watched too many of his matches. and don't
Right.
really care about him. So like, it's not appealing to me that they're booking that match. But it's just a weird thing when the company's trying to grow and bring in all these viewers and stuff and compete with WWE, but they still kind of keep playing to this, like I say, like a niche market.
Yeah, to their already established audience. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Like they say they're trying to grow, but they aren't at all. Like they just do, like you said with that Suzuki guy. I had no idea who that was either. But everybody was like, "It's this guy," and I'm like, "Okay, cool." But all the AEW fans, so they know who it is.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody who's not an AEW fan has no idea. So if you say with no, but like you said, with no build up, you go, "Hey, Brian Danielson, Daniel Bryan, who people do know because he's had exposure on the WWE, which is, whether you like it or not, the company that has the wrestling company that has the most viewers. So
Mm-hmm.
a guy like that is going to be really well known in your company. If you say Brian Danielson against somebody you don't know, that we have done absolutely no, we haven't even tried to tell you who he is.
Yeah.
They just say it's this guy, and I personally hate when this happens. This happens in a lot of different companies, the WWE included. Although they sometimes will build up storylines and shit, but I hate it when they just go, when somebody comes out and the announcer's like, it's with this guy, and you're like, well, who is, like, they put all the expectation on you, the viewer, to know who that is. And I'm like, that's not how that works, right? I
Yeah.
need, because if I don't know who it is, why would I care that he's here? Like, right? That's fucking obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who cares if he's some guy nobody's ever heard of? But they never seem to grow their brand outside of the people that already, and to the people that already watch, they're having a great time. They're like, Brian Danielson versus Suzuki, this is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go up against SmackDown and you have a match that, like you said, it could have had loads of build to it. If this Suzuki guy is a big deal, build to it, make it a match. Don't announce it like 3 days beforehand or whatever. Like, actually put some, because people would have paid attention.
Yeah.
If you build to it, this is kind of what we said about the CM Punk thing, and I do like the idea of the surprise element too. But if they had advertised it, if they had said CM Punk's turning up, loads more people would have watched, because then people would have known that CM Punk was going to be there, right? And if you advertise this stuff, and if you tell them and you build stuff up and you say, hey, listen, man, we're going to be in a couple of weeks' time, you're going to see a dream match. It's going to be amazing. And here's how we're going to build to it. We'll work angles. We'll do things the way that you do in pro wrestling. That's why they do angles. You know what I mean? The reason they do angles and storylines is to build to a fucking money match. Now, the thing about AEW is, because they don't run as many pay-per-views as the WWE do, they have a lot more TV time to fill with matches, like dream matches, if you will. And that's fair enough, because you can use that as an angle. For example, one of the things that they did do that I liked was Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega. Like, putting that on free TV totally makes sense the way they did it as a draw.
Yeah.
Because it's on free TV, they can do the draw like that, because all the matches are supposed to have like TV time, right? That's the angle. Whereas on a pay-per-view, they would have way more time to actually have a proper match. And if it's a draw, neither one of those guys gets the advantage, which means you want to see what happens the next time they fight.
Exactly. It's whetting the appetite.
Right. And again, it seems like it's taken so long for an actual wrestling angle to turn up. And who happens to be involved in this wrestling angle but one of the guys from the WWE? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like the guys who, and like, since AEW has existed, there haven't been a whole lot of these big angles, except whenever they involve guys from the WWE. Whenever the AEW guys are left to their own devices, nothing happens. It's song and dance numbers, and people twiddle their thumbs every week, and then matches that have no purpose. They don't build anything, right?
Well, I think it's like a weird situation where sometimes you will see like a week's build for a match, and then it's just like a throwaway match. It's not like a big, massive feud that's leading anywhere or, gonna head to pay-per-view or anything. And from a certain point of view, I can respect that, and I think that's sort of a good method to kind of adopt, like in terms of trying to not burn through feuds and stuff as quickly as possible, but in terms of just like saying, hey, we're going to do this match next week, but this week we're going to have like these two teams, like shit talk each other or whatever. So at least there's some sort of small build to it. So then when that match happens, you can kind of say, oh, okay, yeah, that did have a tiny bit of heat towards it. But like the trouble is, there's like no sort of happy medium between what AEW do with those kind of short builds and then what WWE does, where you get feuds which go on for like months and months on end, where they just keep wrestling the same matches week after week and exchanging wins and stuff. So like all you kind of want is just like feuds which make sense but which last a little while, which kind of build a story but don't overstay their welcome, and that's not really what we've been seeing so far.
No, we haven't really seen anything like that from either company. But at least the WWE do like storylines and stuff, whereas AEW haven't. Like you said, they do these little builds and stuff, but it's always like a backstage segment or like a run-in after the match.
Yeah,
like that's their build. It's always the same. Why don't they know how to build better? Like for example, there was a hair versus hair match on like, was it Rampage or was it Dynamite?
It was Rampage a couple of weeks back. Of course it was on
Rampage. Why put it on Dynamite? Put it on their fucking B show, which has already been well established as their B show. I think.
Yeah.
That's not me telling tales out of school here.
Certainly in terms of ratings, it has.
Yeah, like it's not even close. And it was a hair versus hair match. Orange Cassidy against who was it? Jack Evans.
Yeah, they'd sort of built it up as being against Matt Hardy, but then Matt Hardy kind of chickened out and put Jack Evans in his place.
Well, first of all, I don't know Jack Evans was part of Matt Hardy's crew. I guess Matt Hardy just has a big crew.
He certainly does.
Excellent, But how long was that match like built up? Doesn't it seem like a bigger like a hair versus hair match is something you should really put some build into it, right?
Yeah, I think
it just kind of happened.
There was about 2 or 3 weeks worth of build to it, but it was mostly, taking place on Dark and Elevation and probably Rampage as well. So if you're only watching Dynamite on Rampage, you're not going to get the full story. And I think maybe that's part of the problem as well, is like AEW sometimes don't treat the shows like Dark and Elevation as like the C shows that they are. They kind of expect everyone to watch them and know what's going on in them, and that's where they can get away with doing like storyline stuff. But not everyone does watch those shows or has the time to watch those shows when there's like 70, 100 hours of wrestling in the rest of the week to watch as well. So
it is about 70, 100, I think. But let me ask you this real quick. That hair versus hair match, let's say it had 2 or 3 weeks of build up to it, right? Fair enough. And it was like Orange Cassidy against Matt Hardy originally, and it turned into Orange Cassidy versus Jack Evans. Number one, like that's the kind of match that's a stipulation match that really needs more than 2 or 3 weeks of build up to it.
Yeah.
Right. But that match itself was only on like 2 or 3 weeks ago, right?
It
wasn't that long ago. Is Matt Hardy and Orange Cassidy, are they still feuding?
No, I think the hint from this previous week is that Orange Cassidy might have issues with Jon Moxley going forward. But
what?
Yeah, because Jon Moxley just beat up Wheeler Yuta, who kind of got drafted into the Best Friends to replace Trent, but without any sort of explanation whatsoever or introduction to who he was, and just another case of, we'll just presume you know who this is. But yeah, so he beat him in like a minute and a half or whatever, and now, Orange Cassidy just gave him a bit of a dirty look, I guess.
Oh yeah, yeah.
afterwards.
He's not cutting a big promo on John Moxley.
No, probably not.
At least he's got his hair. Okay, so that hair versus hair thing seems to have been the end of that feud, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that little feud had a little bit of build to it. But like we said, Matt Hardy has like plenty of people in his stable. So one would imagine that if Orange Cassidy is feuding with Matt Hardy in his stable, that this would have lasted longer than 2 or 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Has it? Or is it
Uh,
just something for Matt Hardy and Orange Cassidy to do?
I guess.
Because
Yeah.
because Orange Cassidy's like super over, right? People like that guy,
Mm-hmm.
and that, fair enough, right? I don't mind him. It gets a bit silly sometimes, but like it's I've seen way worse than Orange Cassidy when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to pro wrestling. So I'm not too bummed with that. But like they always keep him on TV, but they never do anything with him. Right? They just find stuff for him to do so that he can be on TV, right?
Yeah.
So like if they wanted to do a feud with Matt Hardy and his group of people, there's so many people in that group, you could have feuded that shit for 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably, too long.
Yeah.
But they could have because they have the people there and enough. Like Matt Hardy could just be throwing people at Orange Cassidy, and Orange Cassidy's going through them all, and then Matt Hardy's like, I've had enough of this. I'll have to take you on myself, and then he fights Matt Hardy. That's build up. Because then at the pay-per-view, you could have Matt Hardy versus Orange Cassidy. After a couple of months of that, people would want to see that,
Mm-hmm.
and then have Matt Hardy cheat to win, and then you could easily build up a rematch.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make sense?
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out as well, like the actual gimmick for that match was really bad. Like hair versus hair, when Orange Cassidy, he's not exactly defined by his haircut or
Yeah, what's the thing you think of when you think of Orange Cassidy? Definitely his hair.
yeah, it's just I don't know.
The
I
same
don't know
with
what
Jack
they were thinking.
Evans. Who goes? You know what I love about Jack Evans? That guy's fucking hair, right? Like,
Yeah.
wouldn't that have worked with Matt Hardy?
Mm-hmm. Because
Matt
at
Hardy
least
has hair.
that's a look he's kind of had for the last 20 odd years.
Yes, that shit would totally have worked.
Yeah.
But they didn't do any of that because they didn't think about it because that's inconsequential, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I feel like when I watch AEW. Is a lot of that stuff just stuff happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to make sense. It's just a way to fill TV time, which if you watch Raw, is a bad thing. They just fill TV time with shit, and everybody goes, "Well, this sucks. Nothing happened." And that's what I feel like when I watch AEW. Is that like stuff happens, but it never leads anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just stuff to fill the time and to put Orange Cassidy and people like that on TV. But like if you have a guy like Matt Hardy and a guy that's over like Orange Cassidy, why not tell a way better story? Like how is this a better use of Matt Hardy than whatever he was doing beforehand? You know what I mean? Like you fucking use him. Matt Hardy can still go. He can work. And if he's gonna be a manager, fucking make him a good manager. This whole Matt Hardy stable thing, to me, from what I've seen of it, and like I've stopped watching AEW this year because I just couldn't. But like when it started, he was getting all these people together, and it was quite clear that he was a very untrustworthy manager. And then people were like, "Well, I'm going to sign up with him anyway," which didn't make any sense. And then after he got these people on board, he just kept adding more people to his stable, which again is bad news because then your manager isn't paying attention to the people he signed on to manage in the first place. That's a red flag. But they just have, it doesn't matter in AEW land. That shit doesn't matter. And you can tell stories with this shit. Why not have a story where who's a private party, they want to split. They split with Matt Hardy because they're like, fuck you. You've taken all our money, which we signed up for some reason anyway, despite you telling us that you were going to do that. But no, we're fed up with this. We'll do it ourselves. We'll go on our own way, and then have the Matt Hardy crew feud with Private Party. Like there's a storyline. That's the kind of thing they're trying to do with that Team Taz thing.
Yeah.
There is a storyline for you. Finally, Team Taz are doing something. Because for a long time, they didn't do anything. Every time you saw everybody in Team Taz, they lost.
Yeah.
So that's another thing, right? That doesn't make any sense. So then whenever Team Taz start to implode and feud with each other, why would you care? Because every time you've seen Team Taz, they haven't done anything ever. They don't win anything, and they're never involved in like interesting storylines or anything like that. So if they do implode, who cares?
Mm.
Who really wants to see what happens between Ricky Starks and Brian Cage? Because what have they done with Ricky Starks and Brian Cage? Other than this bullshit FTW title thing that doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I will say that feud has had a few stumbling blocks through injury to both guys, which kind of delayed everything and kind of dragged it out. And
Ricky Starks broke his neck or something, right?
yeah, and I'm pretty sure Brian Cage has been dealing with some sort of injury recently as well, which meant that they only just had their kind of big blow off match. And again, I think that was on Rampage as well a couple of weeks ago.
Of course it was.
So
Do any
no one saw
storylines
it.
happen on Dynamite? Dynamite's just where the elite hang out and they just do all their goofy bullshit, and then that's the end of it.
Pretty much.
But what's the storyline? Now, Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega seems like it could be interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's the storyline there?
Well, I guess the storyline is because Bryan Danielson is still new to AEW and he's not got much of a winning record yet, although he has started picking it up like quite a lot over the last couple of weeks or so. The idea is if he wants a rematch against Kenny Omega, then he's got to earn it, which, you know, makes sense and opens the door for Adam Page to kind of step in and finally challenge Omega for the title, which has been such a long time coming. And again, is another thing that kind of got derailed here and there because, well, I guess because they wanted to aim for it to be like a good year-long build to him finally getting his, you know, like retribution against Omega. And at the same time, there was, you know, issues, well, not issues, but like his you know, his wife gave birth to their child, and so he was on paternity leave for like a good month or two as well. So he hasn't been around a whole lot to kind of keep building that storyline in the background. But you know, it's just one of those things, I guess, where while Bryan Danielson can go off and do whatever he needs to do to kind of build up the wins, you get Adam Page and Kenny Omega finally having their feud and match, which we've been waiting for a long time.
But right, here we go. This feud, this Kenny Omega versus Hangman Adam Page feud. What the fuck? Right? My goodness, is that a way to not make an interesting feud?
Yeah.
Good Lord Almighty. If they've been built, and again, this is a thing that we've talked about before, where they seem to confuse like storytelling with their long-term booking bullshit, where they just have it last forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that Chris Jericho MJF thing was a mess for a lot of it, and it went on for too long. But they could have told a really good storyline if it was a little bit more streamlined and it made a little bit more sense. But they didn't do that. They just went with their crazy, wacky shenanigan bullshit, and it turned out to be what it was, which to me wasn't very interesting. This Kenny Omega versus Hangman Page thing should have been a slam dunk. They started it off so well, but then after Kenny Omega won the belt, they did nothing with Hangman Page. Nothing. And people can try and pretend and draw up their conspiracy theory, you know, Charlie Day bullshit, where they go, oh, but look at these little bits that make sense. I'm like, no. What happened was Kenny Omega won the belt and immediately was pushed like a big shot. Immediately treated like a big shot. And Hangman Page just wasn't treated like anything. He went to the Dark Order and sat there for months. And then he lost a match with him and the Dark Order against the Elite, where, correct me if I'm wrong, but the stipulation was if Hangman Page loses, he's not allowed to fight Kenny Omega for the championship.
That is correct.
And now we're leading to a match where Hangman Page fights Kenny Omega for the championship.
Yeah, which I'm kind of surprised that whole issue wasn't really addressed on Dynamite this last week, because you would have thought Kenny Omega would be shouting that from the rooftops, you know, playing it up as a heel and whatnot. But no, I guess we're just forgetting about that now.
Right, because they forgot about it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. And that's another thing. The little things like that were like winning a match, you know, winning that ladder match where you get an automatic title shot. That's not a storyline. right?
Mm.
Like somebody winning the Money in the Bank match, that's not a storyline. What they do after that is the storyline.
Yeah.
Winning the match isn't the storyline. You need to do something else. Winning the Royal Rumble isn't the storyline. It's the build between the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania that's the storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And with this, they just go, oh, he gets another title shot. So we finally get to see them fight. And again, like the idea of separating two people until you build up to a big fight, that makes sense if you can like separate them in like a logical way and not an artificial way, but just going, he's in a jobber group for 6 months. That's that way they never cross paths. I'm like, no, but he should be up there fighting for it.
Mm.
The reason he should be depressed about not being able to win the belt is because he's tried to win the belt and he didn't do it. It should be a lot, but that not just that he lost that match in the tournament last year. There needs to be more to it than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not, you don't get depressed after losing one match, and even the fucking tag title match. I'm like, no. That's because there's been such a big like gap in between all this shit.
Mm.
You know what I mean? You got to keep the pressure on. You got to make this shit make sense, and I don't think they're making it make sense. So what they've done is they've had the tag title loss, which happened. When was that? The summer of 2020.
Yeah, I think maybe September or October, something like that, I want to say.
And then they had that match in the Eliminator tournament, which must have been around this time last year, because they're getting ready to do it again this year.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to complain about that in a sec as well.
Excellent. Yes, is it about the brackets?
Oh, yeah.
Jesus Christ. I saw the brackets. Like, you gotta be shitting me, dude. We'll get to that in a second. But, so after that happened, Kenny Omega won the belt, and Hangman Page got depressed because he couldn't win anything. And then up to now, Hangman Page has just either done nothing or lost, which means that he is in no way, like if the storyline with Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega is that Bryan Danielson needs to do more to earn his spot at the heavyweight championship, then Hangman Page should be way down the list.
Yeah.
Because they count their wins and losses like nobody's business. Apparently that's important. Hangman Page has got no wins at all this year, surely. He's so far down the list. And again, they don't take into consideration who they're beating. If Hangman Page is on Dark or Elevation and he beats a bunch of other job guys with his Dark Order friends in tow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes, well, now I won loads of matches, so that qualifies me as a heavyweight champion. Like, that doesn't count.
No,
because
surely
those are right. But if he beats CM Punk, that's a big deal. But if you look at the numbers, then that's only one win as opposed to a bunch of losses, right? Or a bunch of nothing. Because everybody else has the 40, 50 wins already this year. Because they fight like 4 times a week. So if Hangman Page beat CM Punk, that would be big news. But that would be one win compared to somebody else who wrestles 4 times a week and wins all 4 of those matches, despite the fact that he could be fighting fucking, dumbass McGee on Dark, somebody that nobody's ever heard of, and beats him in 5 minutes, right? Of course, he won't beat him in 5 minutes because none of their matches go 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, who gives a shit about the numbers whenever it's the quality of the opponents that they're supposed to be fighting? Like if this happened, like who's a fucking job guy now in the WWE?
Oh,
I can't even think of somebody fucking useless.
No.
Right. Well, all right. Well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
The 50-50 booking in the WWE has screwed us over with that one. But it makes no sense the way that this shit has been, because Kenny Omega as a champion has been booked against, John Moxley, legit. Orange Cassidy is always on TV and always winning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's fair enough. Now against Bryan Danielson, Christian Cage, who is now the Impact champion, right? Kenny Omega has been put up against actual people with legitimate credentials.
Yeah.
Or Hangman Page hasn't. Hangman Page hasn't done anything interesting at all. And now they're like, this is going to be the big end of this storyline. That's what they think. They think this storyline has been built up perfectly, and they're going to have a big climactic end where Hangman Page finally wins a big one. And it's going to mean something. But it doesn't mean anything if there's been no build-up for Hangman Page's character. Because at the end of it, if that's what happens, Kenny Omega is going to look like the stupidest fucker in the world if he loses that match. to a guy that has not won a match all year, except for this battle royale thing or whatever the fuck, what was the ladder match?
A casino ladder match.
Don't they have a battle royale where you get a title shot?
They have so many battle royals where you get title shots.
They do this shit all the time, and I'm like, why don't, like, how does that qualify you for, like, that works once. That's why I don't like the Money in the Bank and the Royal Rumble. Like, one of them makes sense, but if they're just fluking their way through title shots, and at least that way they're both different. The Royal Rumble is a shot at the WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And the Money in the Bank is kind of like a anything goes, anytime kind of title shot. So at least they're different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with AEW, every couple of months, they're like, this one's, because like now that there's a title eliminator tournament or whatever that we'll talk about now.
Yeah.
They have they're right. So like, this will be a qualifier to see who. But like, if you don't win, I'll just wait a couple of months and get into the next battle royal or the next ladder match and shit, right? And then I'll win that. You know what I mean? They don't.
Yeah.
there's no rhyme or reason for this stuff, and it means, like we've been saying, that whenever people do get title shots, there's no storyline behind it. The storyline is they won this match that qualifies them to be the next contender. But who cares, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can win a ladder match. You don't have to pin or submit anybody. You just have to climb the ladder whenever nobody else is around.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't qualify you as a competent wrestler. That doesn't show you who you've beaten. To say that who else was in that ladder match? Because it was like big guys. John Moxley and fucking Pac, I think, was in that.
Yeah, Lance Archer, I want to say as well.
Yeah, right. All these other guys that like are like, well, maybe not Lance Archer, because again, what the fuck has he been doing recently? Nothing, because they don't know what to do with him. But like, they had some big guys in this match. Now, to say that you've beaten those guys in a match, that's a big news. But to say you've beaten those guys in a ladder match doesn't mean the same thing, because you haven't really you didn't pin John Moxley.
Mm-hmm.
And pinning John Moxley, if Hangman Page had pinned John Moxley, that would be big news, because he's a former AEW champion. But they don't do that shit. Like, doesn't that make sense? If you were gonna have Hangman Page go up against a guy like Kenny Omega, have other people like Moxley or Lance Archer, who was a heel and needs something to do, to go up and go, no, I want to fight Kenny Omega first. I want to do that. And then have Hangman Page go through all these guys. That's how you keep them separate.
Mm-hmm.
You don't keep them separate by just not booking one of the guys. It's ludicrous. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know what the mindset is with stuff like that.
So I'm very sour on this Hangman Page Kenny Omega storyline, because I think it's not going to end in a satisfactory manner, given that it hasn't started or continued in a satisfactory manner. But let's talk some more about their annual Eliminator tournament that they have. Do you have the brackets there?
I do indeed, yeah. So on one side of the tournament, we've got Dark Order's 10 versus John Moxley. I wonder who's going to win that one. We've also got Orange Cassidy versus Powerhouse Hobbs. And given that, I was just saying about Orange Cassidy potentially having some sort of beef with John Moxley, I wonder who's going to win that one and meet John Moxley in the next round. And then on the other side, you got Dustin Rhodes versus Bryan Danielson.
Yeah, Dustin Rhodes, and God bless him. Everybody loves Dustin Rhodes, right?
Yeah.
But also, where did that come from?
Exactly.
What?
I mean, you look at Dustin Rhodes and 10 and Powerhouse Hobbs, and you think, what are they doing in this tournament? Why isn't, Miro in there, or Malachi Black, or Chris Jericho, or Darby Allin, or MJF, or any of these like big names? It's like, do they not want the world championship?
Right. That's another thing. Nobody seems to want the belt. Kenny Omega, when he won the belt, Tony Khan was like, I can't believe this is outrageous. We're going to get the belt off you. But nobody seemed to make any effort to want to take the belt off him.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants the belt. I'm like, that's your World Heavyweight Championship, and everybody's just happy to be there. They don't seem to want to be champion.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. Why wouldn't you want to be champion? What was the last match?
It's Lance Archer versus Eddie Kingston, which is a match we've seen several times before already.
But at least that's decent.
Yeah, you get a good match from those two, but
Yeah.
it's just, again, those are two guys who have been sort of spinning their wheels and sort of feuding on and off most of the year as well. So, yeah, it's just, you got to do something with them.
Right, but like you said, they've been on and off feuding for the whole year. But what have they done? What
Not a
happened
whole lot.
in this feud between these two people?
Uh,
Nothing.
Yeah.
They've just been fighting for a bit, but like, who cares? What's the reason for those two guys to want to fight? Like, there isn't one. So now they're in this tournament and finally they're using the Lance Archer. Lance Archer is a guy, like, how could you not use that guy?
I think you can say that about a lot of guys in AEW though.
But they don't use them properly. Like, there's a difference between just giving them matches and like making them have storylines, because you want a reason to like these guys, and you want a reason to want to see them in matches.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think AEW do that very well. They just give you the matches without the build up. And you're like, well, I want to see the fucking build up. So, like you said with that, this is a World Heavyweight Championship contendership tournament, right? And half the people in it shouldn't be. Where's CM Punk in this?
Yeah, exactly.
Like even we all know it's worked, right? But also, CM Punk is by far the biggest name that they've signed in that company, and they signed him right before this Eliminator tournament. Think about it. It's not rocket science. Put him in there, because what's he doing now?
He's doing dick all. He's basically having a bunch of random matches which he keeps winning, so that adds more credence to him being, involved in this world title tournament, because he's actually got a good record, which is something that's supposed to matter. But instead, no, he's just going to keep dicking around and jumping into the crowd and doing commentary every now and again and wrestling against, Joe Schmo. Like, who gives a fuck?
This is another like bizarre thing, because they got CM Punk. That guy knows how to work. He can talk. He can work. He can do matches, right? That guy can do everything. And they just have him there. They're not doing anything with him. And very shortly, people are just gonna be like, well, whatever. Why was CM Punk a big deal in the WWE? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They had him, and they had him doing storylines, but he never seemed to win them or anything like this. And he became a really big deal whenever they let him just be CM Punk. And he was angry, and he was able to talk about that. And he was in feuds with the big names, and he looked good doing it. He was in feuds with people, with John Cena. You remember that feud with John Cena?
Of course, yeah.
But you remember that feud he had with Jeff Hardy? You remember that feud he had with Rey Mysterio?
Of course.
You remember that feud he had with Chris Jericho?
Yeah.
You remember this shit. You remember him against The Rock, which wasn't really a feud, but you remember this shit, right?
Yeah.
But what's Punk done these days? Like you said, he's fought a bunch of guys, and he's fought the no-name guys. He's fought Will Hobbs, and what was the other guy's name? I've forgotten his name.
Yeah,
we don't even know that fucking guy's name.
No, it begins with D.
Who cares? Right? They're not working a storyline. He's just having matches against people. But if you work the storyline, what if he was in the tournament and then somebody took him out of the tournament? Like, if you don't want Punk to fucking lose in that tournament, have him in the tournament, have somebody ambush him and beat the fuck out of him, so he has to get taken out of the tournament and replaced with somebody else.
Yeah.
And then Punk comes back, finds out who beat him up, and then Punk beats that guy up, and then they're able to work a feud to the next pay-per-view. Punk can work with this guy in a feud, in an actual blood feud, where you want to see Punk fight this new guy. The new guy can say, hey, I'm fed up of people like Punk coming in here and taking our spots. I'm going to make a name for myself by taking out Punk. Let's see if he's as good as he thinks he is. It's not hard. We're coming up with these storylines on the fly. We're not, we didn't write this shit down, but we're coming up with stuff on this show right now that they could do if they wanted to, but they're not doing it, and intentionally not doing it.
Yeah.
Like the CM Punk thing, you would think any competent Booker of the Year, quote unquote, would be able to book CM Punk, but he's not. And we have mentioned in this show that all the other like talented people that they're not using, the Lance Archers and the Eddie Kingstons. I said last year they're not going to know what to do with Eddie Kingston.
Mm-hmm.
and cut in this year. They don't know what to do. Eddie Kingston. There are people that they could be using, and they're not because they don't know how to like do like fun feuds. Eddie Kingston's a guy that could. Eddie Kingston versus CM Punk would be a great feud.
Hell yeah.
They're not doing that because why? Why would you want to do something that people want to watch? Why not just here's some Japanese guy against I don't know, Orange Cassidy. There you go. If you build that stuff up, people will care more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get like the reason CM Punk became a big thing was because people said, "Oh my God, you got to see what this Punk guy did." They didn't say, "Oh, CM Punk's wrestling Epico and we're off," because nobody gives a shit. No offense to Epico, I like Epico, but like that's not how you make CM Punk into a big deal. It's a shit he did that made people want to like the pipe bomb. Everybody still talks about that, right? Because it was incredible and it led to stuff. Not always quality stuff because it's the WWE and they're idiots, but it led to stuff, right? But if he's not dropping pipe bombs, if he's not doing or saying anything of any interest, then who cares?
I think this has been really reflected in the Rampage ratings as well, where like obviously that first night when he came out and made his return, they got over 1 million viewers and like a huge slice of the 18 to 49 demo that they really love. But like Punk has been on Rampage pretty much every single week since then, either wrestling or on commentary. And like he's advertised to be on it, but the ratings have just been sinking like a stone because his presence isn't enough to like get people to tune in. He needs to be doing something of note, something substantial to kind of make people care about tuning in to see him on Rampage rather than here he is against random guy. Who gives a fuck?
Exactly. Nobody's gonna care. Nobody's gonna tune in. They're gonna tune in to see what CM Punk's gonna do, and they're gonna see him work a match against somebody they've never heard of. And then he wins, and then, Punk will shake the guy's hand, and they'll all smile. And you won't hear from Punk for the rest of the show. Or he's on commentary, which is entertaining, but also not what you should do with CM Punk in the first month or two when you have CM Punk.
Yeah.
Make him go out and do stuff. If he costs $3 million a year, make him earn that $3 million, right? I mean, in my head, I'm like, fair play to CM Punk for taking this guy's money and just royally screwing him over. But that part of that is on the shoulders of the booker, who's not booking him the way he should be booked. CM Punk's a top guy. Whether you want to admit it or not, CM Punk's the biggest guy they've ever signed, and they are treating him like a chump. They're not treating him like a big deal, which is bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Like, if they have all these other storylines they want to tell, put them on, pause them, or work around them. Figure out ways to involve CM Punk in a way that makes him interesting. Why wasn't Darby Allin versus CM Punk a longer program? Because CM Punk was like, I'm going to fight Darby Allin. He kind of reminds me of me. And then they were like, all right, cool. And then they fought, and then shook hands, and then they were best friends.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow, the Jeopardy. Oh my goodness, they really got him. Who cares? The idea that Punk came back to work with these new guys is interesting. But if Punk's the one saying I want to work with these new guys, and then there's nothing that goes with it, then what good is that to these guys? There's no good to it. You can't pretend that Powerhouse Hobbs is now a big name and deserves to be in that eliminator tournament just because he had one match against CM Punk and lost.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's not good enough. And that's the thing. They think that just working with a guy gives the guy the rub, but like that's not how that works. You can have a match with that guy, and you can look impressive as hell coming out of it, even if you lose, right? Fair enough. But if you haven't been booked well before or after that, who gives a shit? For example, Darby Allin, when he fought Punk, looked great in that match, but he didn't win. But that's because before that, he was treated like a name, like somebody. And now he's still on TV. I don't know what he's doing now.
Feuding with MJF.
Oh, okay. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Like MJF, there is a guy that dropped the ball with a ton of times.
Oh, massively so.
My goodness, that guy could have been your top heel. But he never seems like a big threat. Ever. He just danders around and kind of does whatever he wants. But like, why not make that guy into a real legitimate fucking threat? Right? And let me tell you this. One of the storylines that I was thinking of that actually is a storyline in AEW, Malachi Black against Cody Rhodes. Right? There was actual storyline there. Those guys would kind of fight and would interact, you know, and there was the stuff happened in that feud. And who does it involve but two guys who used to be in the WWE?
Yeah,
Like,
but you could also point to it and say they didn't do a great job of it because the crowd ended up, you know, turning on Cody Rhodes and cheering Malachi Black. So,
well, I think they were always going to cheer Malachi Black. He's so interesting, and Cody Rhodes doesn't really have a character in AEW, whereas Malachi Black does. He it's so hard because they flip flop whether you're a face or a heel. None of that shit makes any sense. So it doesn't matter, which is also frustrating. But people were definitely going to cheer Malachi Black in that situation because he's the more interesting character, and but at least they were doing stuff. There was a feud, and they kind of built up to matches and stuff like that. Yeah. They didn't have one match and then go, well, that was fun. See you later. Stuff happened, and again, I'm not saying it was great stuff, but stuff happened,
and it kind of made sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a storyline, you know. But what else is going on? What else is happening? You know, we want to be named like 4 storylines all fucking year.
Pretty
you know what
much.
I mean? Like, this is not, and that's. I don't want to say this is the reason why I don't watch AEW anymore, but it's part of the reason. It's like, well, why would I? What is there for me to watch? What's the feud? You know, why? We rag on the WWE all the time, and for good reason, because a lot of the time it's, you know, unwatchable.
Yeah.
But Roman Reigns has been in great storylines with people. He's been doing stuff. There's been feuds happening. The Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair thing, and adding Becky Lynch into the mix, felt like it was artificial at the time. But now it feels like this is an interesting storyline with 3 really talented women. Storyline stuff's happening with the people that it's supposed to be happening with. It's interesting. It's not always done the right way, but it's interesting, and it gives you reasons to watch that show and to root for those people, right? But I don't get that with AEW. They just go, here's all these guys you like, and here they're gonna fight. But why? And give me a reason to watch this. I want to see CM Punk do something sweet. But he hasn't. I love CM Punk, but I love CM Punk being CM Punk.
Yeah, I was excited to see him come back and, you know, finally return to wrestling after so long. And, you know, it sounds positive from like all the interviews he gives about how he's kind of, you know, rediscovered his love for wrestling through AEW. That's a good thing. And like, you know, fair play to him. I hope he continues to feel that way. But as a fan, you just want to see something more from that. Like, it's like you said, it's just not good enough him taking random matches. He needs to be a bigger part of the show, a more important part of the show, and involved in something that as an audience you can sink your teeth into, and we've not seen that yet at all.
No, you want to see him do stuff. That's what's attractive about CM Punk. He's really good at doing stuff. He's smart. If you give him a storyline, he can work with it. But you haven't seen any of that stuff from him or from a lot of people, and it's really disappointing, you know, because they have great people there that can work. And the fact now that they have so many like veterans there is that this is the perfect time to have these veteran guys working storylines with the younger, newer generation, because you can actually build these people up if you want to. They're not doing that. They're it feels like almost deliberately they're just not doing storylines with people. And that's a shame, because it means that the younger generation aren't learning anything. They're not going to learn how to properly get a good storyline going and to really get the crowd invested, because now they're just going to go, well, we don't have to do that. All we have to do is pop the crowd by doing a flip and go into this match and work 20 minutes with an established guy, and that's what's going to get me over. That's what's going to keep me popular with the audience, because that's what gets it popular with that audience. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's happening, and that's a shame, because some of these guys could be fucking big names if they wanted to. MJF is the biggest one. I'm like, that guy could be fucking FTR. Great fucking tag team. But you wouldn't know it if you watched that show half the time.
Yeah.
like what they now the AAA tag champions.
Yeah, apparently so. Even though, like, the AAA titles haven't been like featured on AEW or brought
No,
up at all when the Lucha Brothers won the titles, the AEW titles from the Young Bucks. Like, they haven't factored into anything whatsoever. And then all of a sudden we have a AAA tag team title match on Dynamite, and then for some reason FTR are dressed up like green conquistadors. So it's just like, well, hang on, well, where's this come from? Why is this happening? And
right.
why should we care?
Why should we care? Why are FTR fighting for these belts?
Mm.
The Lucha Brothers won the AEW tag titles. Why isn't that the storyline? The storyline shouldn't be, oh, we took one set of your titles, so now we want the other set of the titles. Because number one, this is what happened with Kenny Omega and Christy Cage not that long ago. And two, that's not a great storyline to begin with.
Yeah.
Why didn't you defend your actual AEW tag titles in the AEW company? Tony Khan surely doesn't have the authority to book other people's titles. That shouldn't be the way that works.
It sure seems that way, though.
I know, which is bizarre. If but again, like, they don't treat it like it makes any sense. They're happy to go, wrestling's not it's all, we all know it's a work, so fucking anything goes. We can do whatever we want. And I'm like, well, if you do whatever you want, then nothing makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's happening on that show. That's what I feel like. They just do whatever they want, and so nothing. And the people who love that show know that nothing makes sense, and they're okay with it. But to me, it irritates me because like, how do you follow it? How do you understand that stuff? I want to see good storylines. I want to see, like, people fighting each other and a reason for them to want to fight each other. But just wins and losses and yada yada, and everybody's a 20-minute match, and we're all best friends, really. There's no heat, there's no anything, no animosity between people.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's. I would like to see a lot more of that stuff, and I don't think they're gonna do it.
No, I think that's the kind of stuff that draws more. Like, the story is what invests people in, most audiences in, rather than the matches or the individual superstars. But until AEW kind of figure that out and start booking towards the stories rather than random matches and individual superstars, I don't see it making a huge difference, and I don't see them growing, at the rate that they kind of hope they will.
Should be.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's only so far you can take, like, special announcements and surprise whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you, it's a surprise. Look, Daniel Bryan and Adam Cole have arrived. Hooray! But then after that, if they don't do, like, we'll use CM Punk as the example. CM Punk coming back was huge. Everybody was excited, and everybody tuned in to watch it. Now, if CM Punk does stuff to keep people watching, then they're going to keep watching, and then they're going to say, why did you see what CM Punk did or said last night? But if you don't, you get to this point where it's 2 months later, and you can't tell me anything interesting CM Punk has done other than coming back and not being a surprise.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't done anything. It's a waste, and that's the issue. Like, they don't. There's too much of the the short term like pop stuff. Like, you're gonna like the tune in next week for a special announcement. I'm like, fucking, who cares? Doesn't that shit has no substance to it. There's no, who cares? I don't know. It's all I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about AEW and their lack of storylines?
No, not really. I think we've pretty much.
We did a pretty good job of covering it, I think.
Yeah.
Tony Khan, if you're listening to this, we give you a bunch of ideas for free, and we'd like to see some of these implemented. If you want more storylines from us, you're going to have to pay.
Exactly. If you think these free storylines are good, wait until you see the ones you pay for.
Exactly. It'll blow your fucking mind, dude. But just, use a bit of logic. Think this shit through. It's not hard. It is hard if you're booking 4 shows by yourself. But that was your call. Nobody said you had to have 4 shows to begin with. And that's the thing with Dark and Elevation and all this other shit. Wouldn't it be better if they just had Dynamite booked perfectly instead of having 4 different shows that we all have to watch and all have to pretend to understand. You know?
Yeah.
I don't fucking know. All right, so that's the show. Thank you very much for listening, guys. We're gonna be back next week with some more stuff. I don't know what we're gonna talk about next week. It'll be a surprise. It's a special announcement next week. You're gonna have to tune in next week to find out what happens. Spoiler alert: there will be no special announcement. But yeah, we'll be back next week with another show. It'll be amazing, probably. So make sure you stick around for that. And that's it. So we're gonna say adios. Thank you very much for listening, guys. And we'll see you in the next one. So goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.